Nobody, and I mean nobody, saw this coming tonight. For months, her name had simply vanished. There were no rumors on the blogs, no leaked photos at the airport, and absolutely no whispers backstage. The arena was settled into a comfortable, almost sleepy rhythm. The previous match had just ended, and the crowd was checking their phones, expecting a commercial break or a generic backstage interview. The air was still, the lights were dim, and without a single warning, the entire building went pitch black. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. It was the sound of 20,000 people holding their breath at the exact same time. A single spotlight hit the stage, white and blinding against the darkness. Then, that first distinct note of music hit the speakers. It wasn't just a song, it was a trigger. The reaction wasn't immediate cheering. It was a collective gasp, followed by a roar that shook the camera lenses. Fans were screaming, standing on chairs and grabbing strangers next to them. Grown men were crying, children were jumping, because after all this time, she was back. It wasn't just an entrance. It was an exorcism of the boredom that had plagued the division. She walked out, not with a smile, but with a look of absolute terrifying focus. Hours before that music hit, the reality backstage was a masterclass in deception. She had arrived in a tinted SUV, completely covered in a black hoodie, ushered through a side door usually reserved for catering staff. She sat in a locked room, isolated from the friends she hadn't seen in a year. There were no hellos, no hugs, just the sound of her own heartbeat and the muffled noise of the crowd through the concrete walls. She paced the small room, fighting the nausea of anxiety. The wrestling world moves on fast. Would they remember? Would they care? The isolation was necessary, but the loneliness was the price she paid for this surprise. When the monitor in the common area showed her silhouette, the locker room didn't cheer. It froze. The current champions, the rising stars, and the veterans all stopped taping their wrists and lacing their boots. You could feel the atmosphere shift instantly. The hierarchy of the entire company had just been rewritten in 10 seconds. For some, her return meant a dream match was finally possible. For others, the ones who had taken her spot, it was a threat. Air backstage became thick with a mix of respect and sudden, sharp insecurity. The queen had returned to reclaim her kingdom, and everyone knew their spot on the card was suddenly in jeopardy. While the arena was shaking physically, the digital world was collapsing. Within 30 seconds of her face appearing on screen, social media platforms began to lag. The timeline moved so fast it was unreadable, just a blur of caps lock and shock emojis. It wasn't just wrestling fans. Major news outlets were picking up the clip. She's back trended #1 worldwide, surpassing politics and sports. It became a shared cultural moment, a rare instance where millions of people felt the exact same surge of dopamine simultaneously. In a divided world, this singular moment of shock brought everyone together in pure, unadulterated disbelief. The secret had been kept, and the payoff was viral gold. Inside the ring, the current champion stood alone. She had been in the middle of a promo, bragging about having no competition left. Now, she looked like a deer in headlights. This wasn't part of her script. The script was gone. She watched the returning legend walk down the ramp, and the microphone in her hand felt heavy. The camera zoomed in on the champion's eyes. You could see the bravado melting away, replaced by a genuine look of uncertainty. This wasn't just a character breaking. It was the realization that the main event, the spotlight, and the narrative no longer belonged to her. She was now just a witness in someone else's story. To understand the volume of the cheers, you have to understand the silence of her absence. She didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because her body gave up. The surgeries, the rehabilitation, the mornings where she couldn't lift her arms, that was her reality for the last year. The fans saw the glitz of the return, but they didn't see the months of physical therapy where she learned to trust her body again. This walk down the ramp wasn't just a return to a job. It was the victory lap of a woman who was told she might never do this again. Every step was a defiance of medical odds. Somewhere in the front row, hidden among the frenzied fans, was her family. They weren't cheering. They were holding hands, knuckles white with tension. They knew the risks. They had seen her in pain when the cameras were off. For the fans, this was entertainment. For her family, this was terrifying. They watched her climb the steel steps, praying that her body would hold up, that the adrenaline wouldn't mask an injury. Their eyes weren't on the pyrotechnics or the title belt. They were fixed on her expression, looking for signs of pain, hoping that this glorious comeback wouldn't end in another ambulance ride. It was a moment of pride wrapped in fear. The music finally faded. The referee held the ropes open. She stepped in. And the crowd noise transformed from a roar into a chant of welcome back. She stood in the center of the ring, looked at the hard camera, and then at the champion. She didn't attack. She didn't scream. She simply picked up a microphone. Her hand was shaking just a little. It was the only crack in her armor. When she spoke, her voice was softer than expected. She didn't talk about belts or fighting. She talked about time. She talked about how easy it is to lose everything and how hard you have to fight to get it back. And then the twist. Everyone expected her to challenge the champion for the title right there. That's how these stories always go. She didn't. She lowered the microphone and looked the terrified champion in the eye. I'm not here to take your spot, she said, the arena falling deadly silent. I'm here because you remind me of who I used to be, before I lost myself. She dropped the mic and walked away. The comeback wasn't about conquest, it was about mentorship. It wasn't a war, it was a passing of the torch. And somehow that made the moment infinitely more powerful than any fight could have been.